It's been a really long time since I've recorded a YouTube video, but I decided I wanted to jump back into it in 2020, and I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the books that I read last year. So my original goal for 2019 was to read 24 books, and I ended the year reading 71. So I had increased my goal a couple of times, and at one point I just decided to give up on matching my goal to what I was doing because clearly I was reading a lot more than I had originally planned. So today I wanted to talk about some of the very best books that I read in 2019. So keep watching and let's get into it. So I wanted to count down the top 10 books that I read in 2019. So I'm going to start with number 10, and that is The Girl Who Drank the Moon. I loved this book. It's a middle grade book. I think it either won the Newbery Medal or a Newbery Honor, and it's a fantasy book. I went through a major fantasy phase in like 4th or 5th grade, and I haven't read too much after that. The main reason is that I was trying to read more books that would fill me with the same kind of joy as Harry Potter, and nothing lived up to Harry Potter. But I decided to pick this one up, and I'm really glad that I read it as an audiobook from my library because I love audiobooks where they do a full cast. So each character's got a different voice. It really helps immerse you in the story. With this one, there was not a full cast, but it was a extremely talented narrator. She was able to do all kinds of different voices, and it was the immersiveness of a full cast, but with just one narrator, which I thought was really cool. So basically the plot of this story is that there is a community called the Protectorate, and every year they put a baby into the woods as like a sacrifice to this witch who comes and they say eats the baby. So they sacrifice this baby to the witch every year, and the witch comes and eats the baby. But one of the other characters in the book is the witch, and it turns out that she is not an evil child-eating witch. She's kind and she's gentle and she helps others. So you're set up knowing that there's some kind of miscommunication between the people and the witch, which develops over the course of the plot in some really interesting ways. But one year the witch comes to get the baby, and the baby is very hungry, and she uses magic to feed the baby some moonlight, which actually gives this girl magic powers. So because of some of the witch's personal history, this is something that she did not mean to do. It's something that she knows could go horribly wrong, so she decides to hide the magic from the little girl. So she raises the girl as her own, and one year when she's about 13, her magic powers start to emerge, but she doesn't know what's happening, and the witch Zan is far away from home, so she can't help her at that time. So it's an incredible story. Meanwhile, all of this magic and witch stuff is unfolding while there's also political turmoil in the Protectorate. When I was going through my list and putting this together, I realized that I almost exclusively chose favorite books that are told through multiple perspectives or alternating timelines, and this one has multiple perspectives. So I really loved seeing the way that the two plot lines unfolded separately and then how they interconnected. I loved all of the characters, I loved the plot, I loved the story, and I loved the audiobook. So I would definitely recommend this whether you are an adult or a child. So favorite book number 9 is The Test, and this one is actually a novella, and it really reminded me of why I think that short fiction is the best way to tell dystopian stories. So this one is about a man named Adair who is taking the British citizenship test to help earn citizenship and greater rights and acceptance for his family. But during the test, things go pretty horribly wrong. They get super violent, and it sort of gives him flashbacks to some of the violence they experienced in Tehran before they left to come to Britain. And he ends up with a whole lot of power. And I can't really say anything else without spoiling, but this one was incredible. It was one of those books where I put it down and I had to think about it for a while before I could move on to doing anything else. It was a great story. I don't have my copy because I let Brendan borrow it, but it was one of those books that really makes you think. So I said that I think short fiction is the best way to tell dystopian stories, and I think that is probably an unpopular opinion, but I think that's because world building is just a little bit overrated. I think when you're telling a fantasy story or a science fiction story, world building can be super important. But if you're telling a dystopian story, a lot of the time your focus is on the moral, the lesson, the theme, whatever you're trying to get across. And I think that those things are way more impactful when you're not focused on the minutia of how the government works or how an apocalypse happened or any of that. So I think being able to pare it down into 100 pages or less really makes the themes more poignant. And this one really made me think about that. So when I was in 9th grade, we did a dystopian unit, and we read some books and we watched some movies and talked about things, but the things that stuck with me were the short stories, like The Lottery, like The Most Dangerous Game, like The Sound of Thunder. Those have stuck with me since 9th grade and really reinforced for me the power of dystopian short fiction. So the test was incredible. And I had read the Sleeping Giants and the Themis Files by Sylvain Neuvel before. I think I'm saying his name correctly. And this was the only other thing that he's published that I was able to get my hands on. And it also really reinforced how much I think he's an incredible author. And I am going to pre-order, buy right away anything else that he writes. All right, so book number 8 is The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. So this one was super outside of my comfort zone. I love thrillers, is what I usually gravitate towards, or middle grade fiction of basically any genre. But this one I think is more of a horror story, which I don't watch scary movies. I don't do scary stuff. I don't know why I picked this up. I think I thought it was going to be a thriller, and then it ended up being a little more horror, a little more supernatural, a little more scary. But I ended up absolutely loving it. So I read this one on my Kindle, and I got it from the library. So again, I don't have a physical copy to show you, but I did buy it for my sister Abby for Christmas because she does like scary movies and scary stuff. So I thought that she would like this book. So The Winter People is a story that takes place in the town of West Hall, Vermont, which has been the site of some mysterious and creepy happenings since 1908, when a woman named Sarah Harrison Shea was brutally murdered. And the story is told through multiple perspectives and alternating timelines, so clearly right up my alley. And some of it is from Sarah Harrison Shea's past, when before her murder, and some of it is from present day. So there are all kinds of creepy things happening, weird figures in the woods, mysterious disappearances, all kinds of stuff in this town. And if you read Sarah Harrison Shea's diary, you might be led to believe that it has to do with calling up spirits from the dead and messing with powers that shouldn't be messed with. In the present day timeline, a teenager named Ruthie finds a copy of Sarah's diary under the floorboards hidden away in her house, alongside a gun and some driver's licenses from people that she's never met, all while her mom is missing. So this kind of starts her journey of discovering what really happened and what her connection and her home's connection are to Sarah's past. So I absolutely could not put this book down. It was terrifying, but I just kept turning the pages, or I guess clicking the button on my Kindle to try to get through it because it was so good and I just needed to know what happened. I would definitely recommend this book, especially if you love scary stories, but even if you are easily scared, it was still amazing, and I'm glad that I tried something out of my comfort zone, even if it was an accident. So book number 7 is from one of my favorite authors, Riley Sager, and that book I actually do have a copy of. It's The Last Time I Lied. I love all of Riley Sager's books. I've really enjoyed them all, but this is by far my favorite one. I picked it up secondhand, which made it even more satisfying because it was only $3.19, and it was so incredible. So in this book, the main character is Emma, and when she was a kid, she went to a summer camp, and one night all of her cabin mates disappeared. And she doesn't know what happened. Went unsolved. But after many years, she's an adult, and they're trying to revitalize the camp, and they invite her back as an instructor. So she agrees to go back, which is like point number 1 of why would you do that? Characters in books making horrible decisions. But she agrees to go back as an instructor, confront her past, try to move past things. But then some very interesting parallels happen between her past and the present, and she feels thrown back into the traumatic memories of her childhood, and she's trying to solve mysteries and work everything out while also trying to solve the mystery of the past and not cause any harm in the present. So I love stories of alternating timelines, and Riley Sager is so good at making a story absolutely unputdownable by dangling the details like tantalizingly over your head the whole time. A lot of authors do that in what can be a frustrating way, but Sager does it in a way that makes you just keep turning the pages. And I think a major part of that is the alternating past and present, how they interweave, so that Emma always knows more than the reader does, because the story is told through her perspective, but we haven't learned her whole past. So Emma is finding things out in the present, and she's able to make connections to the past, and then we find out that past so we can make that connection, and then we learn a little bit more of the past, and then something happens in the present again. And I think it's a really effective storytelling technique, and it's something that almost always suckers me into just flying through a book. And this one was incredible. I've already pre-ordered Riley Sager's next book, which comes out I think in June. Super excited to read that. I haven't been disappointed by anything that he's written. So number 6 is yet another story told through multiple perspectives, and this one is Leaving Time by Jodi Picoult. This is actually the first book I've ever read by her. I'm not even 100% sure how to say her last name, but I loved this book. It really made me realize why she's such a popular author. It was incredible. Not a thriller, not a middle grade novel, so anything that's not one of those two categories is a little bit outside of what I normally read, but I'm really glad that I ended up reading this one. So it is a story about love, it's a story about loss, it's a mystery that needs to be uncovered, and the main characters are a 13-year-old girl who's spunky and independent, a disgraced former psychic who's kind of lost her powers, and an alcoholic former detective. So the three of them adventure together, try to figure things out together, and I love the character interactions. It's narrated by all three of them, as well as another main character are some elephants. So there's an elephant sanctuary, there's a missing mother, there is a father with crippling mental illness. It's a whole bunch of stuff that's pretty difficult to explain, but it comes together to make an incredible story. The ending was kind of sappy, kind of sentimental, a little bit overly so, but the kind of twist part right before that made it worth it for me. So I loved this book, and I actually gifted it to my boyfriend's mom for Christmas because I thought that she would like it as well. So number 5 on my list is, shockingly, told through multiple perspectives and alternating timelines. This one I also have a physical copy of. It is The Silent Patient. This one got so much hype on Instagram, on YouTube. I saw a lot about it, and I'm a little bit hesitant to read super hyped books like that, but this one lived up to it for me. So the plot of this is that there is a woman named Alicia who was a painter, but now is a patient in a psych ward. She shot her husband in the face 5 times and never spoke again. So they're unable to get her side of the story, hear anything from her. She just refuses to speak. So the other main character is her psychotherapist, Theo, who is convinced that he's going to be the one to help Alicia overcome this and be able to start speaking again. So it's told through Theo's perspective and through Alicia's diary entries leading up to the shooting of her husband. And obviously those are intertwining timelines, one from the past, one from the present, and you sort of, as the reader, get hints of what happened. You start to try to figure out why she might not be talking, but it's hard to explain without spoiling. But oh my goodness, this book it absolutely shocked me. The twist, I know some of my friends said that the twist was a little predictable. It wasn't for me. I was able to really get into the story, suspend any disbelief, and it ended up totally shocking me. This is one that I put down and said, wow, which I feel like is rare when it's that hyped up. It's easy for a book to fall short of the hype, but this one, for me at least, really lived up to it. Number 4 on my list of favorite books this year was Big Little Lies. I listened to this one as an audiobook from my library on our way down to Florida this summer and a little bit while we were in Florida, and this one blew me away. I want to watch the TV show now, and I had heard good things about the show, but I've always been a read the book first kind of person. I'm so glad that I did. This book was incredible. And once again, it was definitely outside of my comfort zone. It's told through multiple perspectives, which is always a plus for me, but I'm normally into very fast-paced, plot-driven, big twist kind of thrillers. And this one is very much a character-driven novel, but I really liked the characters. I was able to care a lot about them. I felt invested in their stories and in their lives, and there was just enough of that plot-driven thriller thrown in that it kept me going. So this one starts at the end. There's clearly been a big tragedy, a murder, something bad has happened, and they start interviewing characters who you don't know yet. They're telling just a tiny bit of what they think or maybe a little bit of their side of the story. And these interviews are peppered in throughout as you begin to learn who these people are, who can be trusted, what their motivations are, but you don't get to find out what really happened until the very end. So the whole time you're being invested in these characters, dropping their kids off in kindergarten, living their mom lives outside of it, while knowing that at the end you're going to find out that someone was killed and what happened about it. So I loved this book. It was absolutely incredible. And this one was a surprise for me how much I loved it. I knew it was a really popular book. I knew it had done well, and that lots of people like it, but I wasn't sure how much I personally would love it. So this one was a big surprise, and it came in at number 4. So number 3 was Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. And this one is actually, I think, the only one on my list that I did not give 5 stars to. But it's one that I have thought about and reflected on, and it's kept coming back into my mind, even as I've read way more books this year. So when you've read 71 books and one just keeps popping up in your head and you keep thinking about it, even if it wasn't a 5-star read, I feel like it made my list. And so this is another one I read as an audiobook. This one actually I think might be this one is one of only 2 books on my top 10 list that were not written through multiple perspectives or alternating timelines. So this book is about our main character, Camille, who is a reporter. She has just gotten out of a stay in a psych ward, and she is given an incredibly difficult assignment, which, speaking as someone who has a journalism background, super unethical. She's sent back to her hometown to cover the murders of some preteen girls. And she gets a little bit wrapped up in the case in a personal way, which is why you're not supposed to report on things that you have a conflict of interest in. But it makes for a really interesting novel. So she finds out more about her family history and the ways that people in her small town are wrapped up in things that are not so great, all while dealing with her own problems and her own issues. And I feel like I can't say much more without giving things away. But Gillian Flynn is a super interesting author to me because I feel like she sets up incredible premises. She's so good at writing books that I love with characters that I hate. I feel like that's hard to do when you really just genuinely don't like any characters in the book, but you like the book. I can't think of other books that I've read where I felt that way. Her ideas are sick and twisted, but make for some incredible stories. But she's just not great at endings. And I think that's why when I rated this book on Goodreads, I put 4.5 stars instead of 5 stars. It's just, she has a hard time tying everything up at the end. And for me, that can kind of take me out of the story a little bit. But overall, I loved this book, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since I read it way earlier this year. I gave a copy to my younger sister Elizabeth because I thought she would like it, and I'm excited to watch this HBO show. I hope that they did a good job with that. So number 2 is the book 13, which I just finished. It was my last book of 2019. I finished it on New Year's Eve as I was watching Rockin' New Year's Eve on TV in the background. And wow, I'm so glad that I picked this one up. I was in Barnes & Noble one time just killing time. It looked interesting. I put it on my list, and then I was in the library killing time another day, and I decided to give it a go, and it was incredible. So the premise of the story is what really grabbed me, and once again, multiple perspectives, so it really kept me hooked. But in this story, there is a man on trial for the murders of 2 people. Those murders were committed by a serial killer, but the serial killer is not the man who is on trial. He is a member of the jury. So the whole time, you as the reader know this, and the serial killer knows this, and the defendant on trial knows that he's innocent, but everybody else is putting the pieces together, and you watch as everything falls into place. You figure out how he did it, and there are still, I feel like the really impressive thing is that there are still convincing, exciting twists throughout the story, even though you as the reader know so much at the beginning. The main character is the defense attorney, Eddie Flynn, and he is an absolutely incredibly likable character. I really enjoyed the way that he solved the case. I loved how intelligent he was, but not cocky about it. I feel like sometimes when the main character is like super smart, they can end up being kind of cocky and a jerk, but he was not like that at all. I really was invested in the tiny details of his personal life as well. But the premise and the plot of the story was what I absolutely loved. It was so good. I had so many people message me on Instagram after I posted my review on this saying that they wanted to read it because that premise is just irresistible, and the book really lived up to it for me. And my number 1 favorite book that I read this year is kind of cheating because it's not just one book, but I reread the Percy Jackson series this year, and oh my goodness, those books totally lived up to my memory of them from when I was a kid. They were so good. Percy is still like the funniest narrator of all time. The themes were great. Everything was well written. I cared about all of the characters. I was still super invested, and it had been long enough since I had read them the last time that I kind of had forgotten some of the details, so I was able to still be surprised by things and be excited about it. So highly recommend rereading your favorite books from childhood as an adult, especially if they're Percy Jackson. These books totally held up. And I never ended up reading any of the follow-up series, but I think in 2020 I'm going to do some of that, so I'm super excited about that. So those were my top 10 books of 2019. It was hard to choose just top 10 out of the 71 that I read, but I read some amazing books this year. If you've read any of them, please leave a comment down below and let me know what you thought. And if you read something that was absolutely amazing in 2019 that you think I should add to my list for 2020, just let me know. Bye.